Hey guys, tonight we're heading behind convent walls, not for prayer, but for secrets. Because these nuns, yeah, they're not what you learned about in school. Forget the soft halos and harp music. You're about to step into a world where desire claws under woolen habits, where silence is full of whispered names, and where not everyone makes it out with their faith or reputation intact. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. If you were dropped into a 13th century convent as you are right now, you'd last maybe a week before getting accused of heresy or worse, being found with a forbidden book or a face that shows too much curiosity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me, what city are you in, and what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive as the heavy wooden gates shut behind you. Stone walls surround the convent like a fortress. No going back now. The sky's still grey, not quite morning, and you're handed a rough woolen robe that smells faintly of smoke and something herbal, like dried thyme. No shoes. You're barefoot already, and your skin prickles as cold creeps up from the flagstones. A grim-faced sister leads you down a corridor where light leaks through narrow slits in the wall. You can hear your breath echo in the silence. This is where you'll be reborn, they say. You're not supposed to think about your family name anymore, or what you once dreamed of. You belong to God now, but the tension in the air? That doesn't feel holy. It feels heavy, like a place where secrets have weight. You meet the abbess briefly. Her face is lined like tree bark, eyes sharp as crows. She doesn't speak to you directly. Instead, she turns to one of the older sisters and mutters something in Latin, and you catch the word novitia, novice. That's you. Not a full nun, not yet. You'll spend the next year in limbo, learning the rules, watching your every step, praying more than sleeping. They'll decide whether you're fit to take your final vows or not. Your first task? Scrub the cloister walk with a brush no bigger than your palm. You do this next to another novice, Sister Magdala, who mutters under her breath about useless piety, and rolls her eyes every time someone passes. She was sent here because her older brother got all the inheritance, and her parents didn't want to pay to marry her off. Common story. You're not here because you're holy, you're here because you're disposable. By the time Compline comes, the final prayer of the day, you've been on your knees for hours, and you smell like vinegar and sweat. You're taken into the chapel, a small space with flickering beeswax candles and a large wooden crucifix that seems to watch you. You sing the psalms in Latin, stumbling over the words. Your stomach growls, but food isn't offered again until tomorrow. Hunger, they say, purifies. You sleep in the dormitory on a straw mattress lined up next to 20 others. The scent of sweat, old linens and candle smoke thicken the air. But you don't sleep easily, because in the next bed over a nun whispers someone's name, not Christ's. Here's the part they don't teach you in your average church history class. Medieval convents weren't always solemn places of peace and purity. They were deeply political, often volatile spaces filled with women who didn't choose to be there. Many were dumped by their families, too rebellious, too poor for a dowry, or just inconvenient. Some were former wives whose husbands had died. Others were noble daughters considered too mouthy to marry. They were cloistered, yes, but they carried their pain and ambitions in with them. And they talked. That's the real scandal. The silence was full of words passed between beds, behind cloisters, under breath. Stories, prayers, complaints, poetry, and sometimes much more. You notice quickly that the abbess has favourites. Sister Joan, always at her side. Sister Joan, who wears her veil a bit looser than the others, whose hands are never dirty, who never scrubs the floors. You find out later that Joan was born of noble blood, and rumour says her family bribed the abbess handsomely to ensure her daughter lived comfortably. Joan watches you too, a little too closely. Now let's throw in a quirky fringe fact, because you deserve one. Did you know that some medieval nuns kept pet squirrels? Seriously, there are records, actual medieval manuscripts describing nuns who raised red squirrels in their cells, feeding them bits of dried fruit and letting them nest in their robes. Why squirrels? Who knows? Maybe it's the medieval version of having an emotional support animal. Or maybe they just really like something that bit everyone else but curled up in their lap. Now, back to the tension. As you try to sleep, you hear keys jingling. Sister Rebecca making her rounds. She's the convent enforcer. She doesn't pray as much as she patrols, sniffing out whisperers and rebellious thoughts. If she finds you with contraband, a secular book, a stolen apple, you get sent to the reflection cell, which is less reflection and more cold stone box. She especially hates laughter. Sister Rebecca hasn't laughed in years, you're told, ever since she caught 2 nuns holding hands after Compline. And here's something scholars are still debating. Were medieval convents truly enclaves of spirituality, or were they more like prisons disguised as religious institutions? Some argue they offered safety and education to women who had nowhere else to go. Others believe they were cages, sometimes gilded, often brutal, where inconvenient women were silenced. Both can be true. Depends on the convent, depends on the nun, depends on what you choose to believe. But tonight your faith doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here. The doors are locked, and the first layer of holy has already begun to peel away. Morning doesn't come with sunlight. It comes with bells. Loud, clanging, insistent bells that rip you out of a half-dream where you're back home, barefoot in a meadow, eating something that isn't barley stew. You're not alone in groaning. The entire dormitory stirs at once, like a hive suddenly poked. Bodies rise in the dark, some already murmuring morning prayers, others muttering curses too quiet for anyone holy to hear. The air is still cold, and someone's candle won't light, so you're dressing in the dim, struggling into your stiff wool robe while toes freeze against the stone floor. Outside, the cloister is wrapped in fog. The frost crunches under your feet as you're led in silence to Lauds, the first of the day's 8 canonical hours. The chapel's stone walls hold the chill like a grudge, and the nuns' breath clouds in front of their faces as they chant the psalms. Your voice blends into the chorus, not because you know what you're saying, but because not knowing is better than standing out. You're already starting to understand the rules. Silence is safe, questions are dangerous, and obedience is everything. After prayer, it's time for the day's assignments. Sister Magdala is sent to the garden to prune the rose bushes. Even in winter, the thorns must be managed. You're sent to the scriptorium to assist in the binding room, where they're copying devotional text by hand. It sounds peaceful in theory. In reality, it smells like parchment and boiled leather, and the nun in charge, Sister Catalan, has a sharp eye for mistakes and a sharper tongue. You're tasked with slicing vellum pages with a curved blade so fine it could double as a surgical instrument. Your fingers are trembling, but no one cares. You slice anyway, careful not to bleed on the sacred text. And there, as you settle into the rhythm of repetitive tasks, you begin to hear the other stories. One of the older nuns, Sister Isabel, talks softly as she sharpens quills. Her voice is dry, brittle as old paper. "You know," she says, not looking at you, "many of us were given to God before we could walk." You glance up. She continues, "My father had 5 daughters, no sons. The dowry for a marriage was 3 times what it cost to place me here." She taps her inkpot once. Economics, not piety. That's the truth of this place, and it starts to settle on your shoulders like dust. This isn't a sanctuary of chosen devotion. It's a storage facility for inconvenient women. Daughters not pretty enough, not obedient enough, not rich enough to marry off. Widows too young, girls too clever, bastards too visible. The convent walls are thick, but they aren't built just to keep sin out. They're built to keep these women in. You start noticing how many of the sisters carry their family histories like wounds under their habits. Some have resigned themselves, voices hollowed out by years of obedience. Others still burn, quiet and slow, with something that might be anger or might be faith. It's hard to tell. A few still fight. There's one, Sister Avis, who catches your eye during the midday meal. She doesn't bow her head as long as the others when grace is said. She chews slower. She looks around. Later, when you're rinsing the bowls in the freezing washhouse, she brushes past and whispers, "Don't let your thoughts get lazy. That's when they win." She's gone before you can ask what she meant or who they are. Now here's something bizarre you learn around this time. Medieval nuns had fashion codes. Yep. Even though they all wore habits, different orders had different veils, robe colours, and even belt lengths to signal status, age, and spiritual purity. Some were practically couture. One Benedictine convent even banned leather belts because they were too luxurious. And here's the kicker. Some nuns still accessorised with little tokens, hidden embroidery, or rings from their pre-convent life tucked into hems. Holiness apparently had a loophole or two. But all this woven fabric and daily labour can't hide the truth simmering beneath the surface. Sister Hiltrude collapses during none the afternoon prayer. One moment she's upright, the next she's slumped over, hands still locked in prayer position. There's panic. You're pushed aside as the older sisters crowd around her. Sister Rebecca scowls like someone broke a rule. The priest is summoned, not for medicine, but for absolution. She doesn't die, not yet, but you notice that no one asks what caused it. You hear the word weakness, whispered like a diagnosis. In the infirmary, you see she has bruises on her arms that don't look self-inflicted. This place eats you slowly. You get fewer hours of sleep than a soldier, more work than a farmer, and no say in your own fate. But it's not just the labour, it's the subtle power dynamics. Who gets the warm water? Who eats first? Who's allowed to write verses in the margins of their psalter? It's the constant performance of submission and the quiet threat that everything you do is being watched, not just by God, but by the living. Every kindness might be a trap, every silence might be a message, and scholars still argue about this. Were these power structures meant to enforce religious order, or to maintain a social hierarchy that mirrored the world outside? Some historians insist that convents gave women rare access to literacy and leadership. Others argue those privileges came with a leash, and stepping too far out of line meant spiritual, and sometimes physical, punishment. There's evidence for both. But as you lay in your cot that night, listening to a mouse chew through someone's sock under the floorboards, the truth feels closer to a prison with a stained glass window. As you drift off, a single candle still burns near the door. You catch the shape of Sister Avis leaning against the frame, watching the hallway. She's not supposed to be there, but she's not afraid. She turns slightly, and in the flicker of flame, you see the curve of a smile. It's not warm, it's not cruel, it's knowing. You start to wonder, if the church thinks it owns these women, why do so many of them look like they're planning something? The next morning, the fog is heavier. It sits in the cloister like unspoken guilt, soft and grey, muffling everything except the bells. Your robe is damp again because it never really dries, and your hands are cracked from cold water and lye soap. You barely recognise your own fingers anymore, thin and pink from scrubbing floors and stone steps. You're starting to look like them, hollow-eyed, quiet, pressed down by the weight of God and rules and centuries of silence. You've made it to your third day when you learn about the dowry game. It's not discussed openly, of course. It's slipped in like a side comment, casual but sharp. Sister Cataline, while correcting your uneven parchment cuts, mutters, "You slice vellum like a girl who came with a half-dowry." You blink. She doesn't look up. Some come with gold, some come with nothing. It determines how you're treated, if not by God, then certainly by us. That night, during supper, barley again, with a lone piece of carrot, you sit next to Sister Magdala, who seems to have declared you tolerable. She leans in, voice low. "You don't know about the dowry tiers." You shake your head. She grins. "Of course not. You're still shiny." She counts on her fingers. Tier 1, rich girls. Full dowry, sometimes a bonus. Get the best beds, the soft robes, skip the grossest chores. Tier 2, partial dowry. Gets you treated fair if you don't make noise. Tier 3, no dowry, you're a mouth to feed, a burden. You'll spend most of your life in silence and cold. You stare down at your bowl. You never asked what your parents paid to put you here. You just remember the way your mother avoided your eyes the day you left. The truth begins to wrap around you like ivy. The hierarchy inside these walls mirrors the outside world. Nobility still wins. Wealth still talks. And God. God is more like wallpaper. A holy print over a very human power structure. The prayers are real, yes. The belief, maybe. But underneath it all is strategy. The convent is a chessboard. And you're still figuring out if you're a pawn or something more dangerous. Now here's a historical fact that hits like a cold slap. Many families used convents as parking lots for inconvenient daughters, especially noble ones. Inheritance laws meant only the eldest son got land and title. Marrying off every daughter was expensive and risky. A failed marriage? That could ruin alliances, but sticking a daughter behind a wall with a respectable dowry, that sealed the deal with God and society. It was neat, it was clean, and it made those daughters disappear. She chose the religious life, they'd say. In reality, most of them didn't choose anything at all. And what if they fought it? Sometimes they ran. But if they were caught, they'd be dragged back and punished, locked in stone cells, denied food, forbidden to speak for weeks. Some didn't survive, some didn't care to. In the next days, you begin to notice the tells. The way some sisters flinch at raised voices, the quiet bruises. The names muttered in sleep. Sister Isabel, the one with the parchment voice, tells you in passing, "We're not angels, we're just women who got stuck with halos." And then you meet Prioress Adele. She doesn't interact much with the novices, but today she appears during meal prep. Tall, bony, lips pursed like she's permanently holding in a scolding. Her eyes sweep the room and land on you. "You," she says, "come with me." You're led through a side corridor you haven't seen before. Walls hung with tapestries of saints so faded they look like ghosts. Adele walks fast. You don't ask questions. Eventually you reach a chamber with a high window and a locked cabinet. There she opens a leather-bound register. Names, dates, lines of Latin. She hands you a quill. You'll copy the entries from this week, carefully. As you write, your hand aching, she watches. After a while she speaks. "Do you know why we track the purity of bodies?" You pause. "Look up," she narrows her eyes. "Because a chaste woman is the church's finest treasure, untouched, unblemished, and if she falls," she lets the words hang, "she becomes a liability." You nod slowly, returning to the register. She adds more softly, "Your hymen is worth more than your voice." And then, with a shrug, "That's just the truth." There's something broken in that logic, but you're not brave enough, yet, to say it out loud. Here's your quirky detail for this one. Some medieval convents performed literal virginity tests before women could take final vows. No joke. The church would send midwives or matrons to physically inspect a girl's body to ensure she was pure. This was invasive, humiliating, and obviously unreliable, especially since the entire test was based on flawed biology and cultural myth. But hey, in a world where your body was a bargaining chip, everyone wanted a receipt. A week in, you start waking up in the middle of the night with the bells in your head. You're adjusting, but also fraying. The days blur into a cycle of cold and silence, but the evenings, they hum with something else. You start to notice that after Compline, not everyone goes straight to sleep. Some sisters linger in the dark corners of the cloister. Some whisper. You even catch Sister Joan, yes, that Joan, slipping out of the dormitory barefoot and vanishing into the scriptorium wing long after everyone else has laid down. You follow her once, just enough to see a flicker of candlelight behind the parchment room door. She's not alone. You don't recognize the other figure. They're speaking too softly to hear. Back in your cot, you think about the layers of this place. The rituals, the whispers, the judgment. You wonder how many of the women here are actually living their vows, and how many are just surviving them. There's a scholar, somewhere in Oxford or maybe Bologna, who once called medieval convents the first corporations for women. Structured, hierarchical, regulated by rules and bylaws. But unlike modern companies, these didn't just profit from your labour. They owned your time, your voice, your thoughts, your body. You start wondering, what would happen if you broke the rules? If you said no? If you left? You already know the answer. But you're starting to wonder if someone else already tried. The first time you hear the phrase, "body of Christ," used with a smirk, it's Sister Magdala again. She says it during evening laundry, standing hip-deep in a freezing stone basin, her hands red and raw as she slaps a tunic against a flat board. "They say we're brides of Christ," she says under her breath, glancing around. "But he never shows up on wedding night, does he?" She grins sideways, teeth sharp in the dim torchlight. And the other sisters don't laugh, they don't even look up, but you catch the tension in their hunched shoulders. They heard, they always hear, and someone will repeat it later when it's safer. Magdala spits in the water. "Virginity," she mutters, like it's something you keep in a jar. You don't respond, not because you disagree, but because you don't yet know how much truth you're allowed to think, let alone speak. It's around this time that the phrase Virgo Intacta starts floating through your days like an uninvited guest. You hear it from Sister Cataline in the scriptorium. You hear it from the abbess when she's counselling a nervous novice who might be showing a bit too much stomach during chores. And once, you hear it muttered by a visiting friar during a homily on moral fortitude, his eyes lingering a beat too long on the line of kneeling girls. You start realising how obsessed the church is with what's between your legs, and more importantly with it staying unused. Entire theological frameworks rest on the idea that a woman's virtue is directly tied to her sexuality, or lack thereof. A virgin, you're holy. A widow, you're suspicious. A woman who's never married but doesn't live in a convent, you're a walking scandal. The strange part is how often that obsession turns bizarre. One of the nuns, Sister Blandina, tells you during needlework that a bishop once asked her very seriously whether she'd ever felt temptation in her dreams. I said yes, she says with a dry chuckle, because I wanted to see his face. You ask what he did. She grins. He gave me 3 extra prayers and wouldn't look me in the eye again. There's a darker edge to the virginity politics, though. You learn that some girls, very young ones, are denied entrance to the convent until their purity can be verified. Inspections, whispered like the word execution. Sometimes it's as simple as a matron lifting a skirt. Sometimes it's not. You hear of one novice who arrived bleeding after a journey with a male escort. Her acceptance was delayed 3 months while church officials argued whether her body had been compromised. No one ever asked what happened to the escort. It all builds to something that's both absurd and deeply disturbing. Virginity is treated as a tangible, measurable, almost physical object, something that can be held, confirmed, possessed, and once it's lost, you're not just less holy, you're less valuable. Literally, your dowry is worth less. Your chances of taking final vows drop. You become a risk. Now here's the quirky detail for this section. Brace yourself. Some medieval theologians argued that the Virgin Mary remained physically intact even after giving birth. No tearing, no blood, not even labour pains. This belief, that her hymen stayed miraculously whole, was debated for centuries. Entire treatises were written on this. It became an actual point of doctrine, meant to underline her perpetual virginity. If the church was this obsessed with a divine vagina, it's no wonder regular women didn't stand a chance. But back in the convent, you start seeing the small rebellions against this madness. One day, during lessons with Sister Avis, yes, she's taken you under her wing, you're copying psalms into a rough workbook and she slides you a different page. It's not scripture, it's poetry, soft, aching, sharp. It reads like a confession, but not the kind you'd give to a priest. It's about touch, about longing, about hunger, but not for food or righteousness. It's written by a nun years ago. A name is signed at the bottom in faded ink, one you've never heard. You look up. Avis just shrugs. We preserve what we can. You begin to realise that not every sister here is defeated. Some of them have found ways to carve out spaces for themselves, in art, in words, in whispered memory, and some have even found closeness. Not all the attachments here are sisterly in the way the abbess would approve. You don't know everything yet, but you're starting to see it in the looks passed during prayer, in the way certain pairs of nuns always sit beside each other, how one lingers a moment too long helping another wash her feet. And this opens up another question, one scholars still argue over today. Were these emotional and physical relationships among nuns romantic, sexual, spiritual, all of the above? There are records of love letters between sisters, of poems that drip with longing, of accounts that speak, quietly, of touch. Some historians believe these relationships were purely platonic, expressions of deep spiritual connection. Others say they were very much romantic and very much physical, just hidden behind the cloister's walls and the Latin prayers. There's a term you'll learn later, particular friendship. It was the church's polite way of describing those intense, exclusive bonds between women in religious life. The kind of relationship that made superiors nervous. The kind that, if discovered, could lead to forced separation, confession, punishment. But also the kind that kept some women sane in a place that constantly demanded silence and submission. That night, you watch as Sister Joan passes Sister Clarice a folded scrap of parchment in the corridor. They don't speak. Joan keeps walking. Clarice tucks it into her sleeve without looking. You feel the secret of it like a hum in the air, You're beginning to understand that the convent isn't just a prison, it's also a theatre, a place where every woman wears a role: nun, novice, prioress, penitent. But behind those parts, there are stories they won't put in registers. There are truths they whisper only to each other, or hide in ink. Your own role, right now, is the quiet one. The one who listens, watches, nods at the right time. But inside you're building something, a map of names, looks, silences, and at the centre of it is a question you can't shake. What happens to a woman who stops pretending? You start noticing the sounds, not the bells, that's easy. You've adjusted to those. No, it's the quieter things. The soft sighs in the dark after Compline, the subtle creak of floorboards when someone's walking where they shouldn't be, the rustle of parchment when it's not prayer time. There's a rhythm to life here, yes, but under it runs a different current, a hidden cadence. You're beginning to move in sync with that one, the rhythm of secrets. It's a few weeks in when the nights start getting longer. Winter is settling over the convent, and you're waking up with frost on your blanket's edge. No one talks about it, but everyone moves slower, clutches their robes tighter. The chapel is colder than it should be. You swear the crucifix over the altar looks more judgmental when you're shivering. You've developed the habit of tucking your hands under your arms during prayer just to feel your own warmth. It's not dignified, but dignity's a luxury here. You spend more and more time with Sister Avis now. She doesn't ask why you're drawn to her, and you don't ask why she seems to know more than anyone else. She shows you the hidden spots of the convent, alcoves behind the cloister garden, a forgotten stairwell that leads nowhere, a loose stone behind the statue of St. Margaret where girls used to hide contraband. You begin to understand that every inch of this place holds stories, buried beneath layers of ash and incense. It's during one of these whispered explorations that she tells you about the night whispers. There's a tradition, she says, crouched beside you in the dark corridor behind the novice dormitory. After Compline, after lights out, some sisters talk in code, murmurs, questions, prayers twisted into confessions. It's how truths survive. You ask if she's ever spoken them. She gives a half smile. Once, maybe twice, but mostly I listen. That night, back in your cot, you keep your ears open. And sure enough, there it is. A whisper, then another. Names. Fragments. She said the priest touched. No, behind the scriptorium. They found it under her pillow. It's not constant, just scattered, like leaves stirred by wind. You lie still, pretending to sleep while your mind races, catching phrases and piecing together rumours that feel more real than anything you've been taught here. One voice mentions Sister Agnella. You remember her, young, maybe 15, quiet, with a permanent look of confusion like she was always halfway into a thought. She hasn't been around for a few days. The official word is that she was sent to the infirmary with nerves, but the whispers say otherwise, that she was found in tears after confession, that she tried to run, that she might be locked in the cellar. You want to ask Avis, but you know she'll only tell you what she thinks you're ready to hear. So instead, you wait, watch, take your time, and in the meantime, something else is brewing. One morning during chores, you're in the kitchen helping Sister Mirabelle chop onions when she pauses, knife still in hand, and says softly, "You know they're watching how close we get." You blink, surprised. She nods toward a nearby doorway. Not them, she clarifies. The ones who send letters, inspectors, outside eyes, churchmen. She smiles faintly. They worry about us getting too fond of each other. It takes you a moment to understand, then you do. You've started seeing it too, the way two sisters linger a moment longer during prayers, the comfort of a hand brushing another's back as they pass. It's quiet, careful, intimate. But not all of it's innocent. Or if it is, it's innocent in the way a secret kiss is innocent. Brief, stolen, dangerous. Late one night you pass by the garden and see Sister Jones sitting in the moonlight. Not alone. Sister Clarice's with her, their heads bent together. There's nothing overt, just stillness. But the air feels heavy around them, as if the moment is holding its breath. You slip away unnoticed, your heart thudding louder than your footsteps. That night, you lie awake wondering what rules are real and which ones are only enforced when convenient. Who decided holiness and loneliness had to be synonyms? And what does it mean that some sisters seem to find comfort in each other in ways the Church refuses to name? Here's your fringe fact of the day. in the 14th century, an Italian bishop launched a full investigation into improper attachments among nuns in his region. He believed these excessive affections were undermining the sacred nature of the convent. His report included testimonies, many probably coerced, about shared beds, passionate letters, and secret kisses. His solution: more isolation, less talking, more punishment. Because clearly, if two women cared for each other, it had to be the devil's work. But not all officials reacted that way. Some turned a blind eye. Some, disturbingly, were too busy taking advantage of their own access to nuns. It was safer, after all, to accuse women of weakness than to question the behaviour of priests. And this opens up yet another scholarly debate. Were convents sites of repression or of freedom? For some women it seems they were both. A prison, yes, but also oddly a refuge. A place where a woman could read, learn, write. A place where she might find someone who actually listened, even if it meant risking everything. You're starting to realise you're part of a lineage now, not just of faith, but of survival. Every whispered word, every hidden letter, every forbidden glance, it's all part of the same quiet rebellion. And while no one says it outright, there's a sense among the sisters that some rules are meant to be broken, or at least bent. You begin keeping your own notes. Nothing explicit, just little scraps of parchment tucked inside your psalter. Words, thoughts, observations. One entry reads, "She touches her shoulder like it's the last thing she'll ever hold." Another, "The truth hides in silence better than in prayer." You're not writing scripture, but it feels sacred anyway, and you're not alone. It starts with a letter, not yours. You haven't dared to write anything beyond fragments, riddles really, disguised enough that even a priest might miss the meaning. No, this one's already opened when you find it, tucked behind a loose stone in the cloister wall, barely sticking out like a tongue that forgot to keep quiet. You pull it free, and it's fragile, water-stained. Someone's thumbprint has bled the ink in one corner, but the words are still readable. Barely. It's a love letter. You stare at it for a long moment in the garden's shadow, while the others clear away the frost-killed cabbage leaves. The parchment trembles slightly in your hands, not from wind, but from what it says. No name is used, just my beloved sister. It talks about the nights they've shared, the fear, the longing, and the promise of more. "I press your hand even now," it ends, "though we're apart. You know what this is. You also know what it means. The rumours you've been collecting in your mind aren't just rumours. They're truths, carefully wrapped in silence and passed hand to hand. There are relationships here, real ones, emotional, physical, hidden but alive. Sister Joan and Clarice might be one. There could be others. You think of the way Sister Mirabel once looked at Avis when she thought no one was watching. Soft, aching. You could turn this in, hide it, burn it. But instead, you fold it back carefully and return it to its crevice. You're not ready to carry that kind of weight alone. Not yet. That night you dream of fire. Not hellfire, the kind they use in sermons, but small secret flames. Candlelight in corners, warmth in fingertips. You wake up sweating and disoriented. The chill no match for the heat that lingers behind your ribs. The next morning the routine continues. Prayer, chores, cold bread and thinner broth. But now everything feels more alive, like the veil's been lifted just a little. The abbess lectures during scripture study about discipline in body and spirit, and all you can think about is that trembling ink on the letter. You glance across the chapel and see Sister Joan gazing at the stained glass with the serenity of a saint, but now you're not sure if it's real or just very good acting. In the laundry basin, Magdala hums a song too cheerful to be holy and says, "You know, if you're going to fall in love here, you better be subtle. Subtle like a shadow or a whisper." You stiffen. She laughs softly. "Relax. I'm not accusing you, but we've all seen it. It's not new." She tells you, as she wrings out a robe, that Sister Clemence once carved a name into the underside of her cot. Not a saint's, a fellow nun's. When it was found, they made her scrub the chapel floor for a month without speaking. She went hoarse from not speaking, and then she smiled through the whole thing. Like she still had her secret, Magdala says, half impressed, half wistful. Here's your historical nugget of truth for today. The Church actually had policies, as vague ones, about female-female intimacy in convents. Most of it was buried under euphemism. If a bishop got a whiff of something irregular, he might order the women separated, or increase surveillance, or in rare cases expel one of them. But punishment wasn't consistent, because officials often didn't know what to make of it. They understood sin with men. They had whole libraries about that. But what two women did behind closed doors, that was a puzzle, an embarrassment. Some chose to pretend it didn't exist. Others panicked. The 12th century theologian Peter Abelard, yes, that Abelard, the one who got famously castrated for his affair with Heloise, warned about particular friendships in female monasteries. He said they were the devil's mockery of holy affection, which, you have to admit, sounds more like jealousy than theology, and the debates haven't stopped. Modern scholars go in circles about whether these relationships were really sexual. Some insist they were just deeply emotional bonds, born of isolation and the need for comfort. Others point to the surviving letters, poems, even trial records that say otherwise. It's hard to be sure. But if you've lived here even a few weeks, you start to understand that love, real love, finds a way to breathe, even when everything else tries to choke it out. Later that week, Sister Avis leads you to a narrow room above the refectory, a storage space once, long forgotten. Dust hangs in beams of light like suspended time. This, she says, used to be the novices' writing room, before the scriptorium was reorganised. She says it with just enough sarcasm that you know something was covered up. She shows you what's left, scratched messages in the wood, notes on faded parchment too faint to read, a single sentence written in charcoal on the wall. My soul is mine even if my body is not. You stare at it, the words almost humming. You ask her if she's ever loved someone here. She's quiet for a long time, then, yes, just that. She doesn't elaborate and you don't push. But she touches the wall like she's remembering. You spend the next few nights with your heart a little louder. You start looking at the sisters not just as holy women, but as people. Tired, complicated, full of half-spoken stories. Some suffer in silence, some rebel quietly. A few find something else. Connection, desire, love. Whatever you call it, it's real. And now, you're part of the story, whether you want to be or not. Because the next night, as you sit copying psalms by lamplight, a scrap of parchment slides across your table. You don't see who sent it. You open it carefully. It's a line of verse. When I see you, I remember myself. No name, no signature. But you already know. The veil is thinning. It takes you 2 days to figure out who wrote the note. Not because you're slow, because whoever sent it is good. The ink matches no one's visible supply. The parchment is the kind kept for translating Latin. And it was slipped across the table during a scriptorium shift so silently you didn't even hear a breath. But it's the handwriting that gives it away. You've seen it before, curling just so around the tail of each S, the letters slightly slanted like they're leaning in to tell a secret. And when you check the margin notes in the Psalter copy Sister Clarissa's been working on, there it is. Same hand, same ink, same quiet rhythm. You don't say anything to her, not right away, but the next day, you linger after supper. You wait as the others rise for evening prayers. She doesn't look at you, but she doesn't hurry to leave either. You sit across from her in silence, and then slowly slide a page toward her, blank, except for a single line. I remember you too. She doesn't react, not visibly, but the next time she passes you in the hall, her fingers brush yours, not accidentally. It begins, not a romance, not yet, but something, an understanding, a thread tied between you, pulled tight through the hours of prayer and the harsh bells, through cold meals and aching knees. You begin watching each other across the chapel, across workstations, through the fog of incense. In a place built to erase your selfhood, here is someone reminding you that you still are someone, and this, of course, is forbidden. Which is ironic, because just this week, the confessor, Father Henri, preaches a homily about the boundless love of Christ. He loves us beyond comprehension, he says, his voice echoing against the chapel stone. He desires to dwell in us. He repeats that word, desire, more than once. You notice how some sisters fidget. A few close their eyes not in reverence, but retreat. Because that kind of holy desire is the only kind you're allowed here. The kind that inflames but doesn't touch. that consumes but never satisfies. Anything else, that's sin, that's heresy. And yet, as you scrub the refectory floor later, Clarice walks past and drops a sprig of lavender at your knee. Nothing said. But the scent follows you all day, even when you tuck it deep into your robe. It smells like defiance. Here's a strange historical tidbit for your collection. In some convents, priests had a private entrance, a literal door cut into the wall of the enclosure, often discreet, sometimes hidden, meant to allow confessors in without violating the cloister. But those doors, they didn't just let in prayers. They let in all kinds of things: letters, food, gossip, and occasionally bodies. There are entire court records documenting inappropriate relationships between nuns and their confessors, secret children, hidden money, even escape attempts. One case tells of a nun who gave birth in the infirmary and claimed it was a miracle. Nobody bought it. Your convent has such a door. You find it by accident one cold morning, chasing a wind-blown page from the scriptorium. It slips between the cracks of a forgotten hallway, down a tight set of stairs, and into a narrow alcove you've never seen. And there it is, small, iron-latched, reinforced with thick wood, the kind of door that doesn't creak, the kind made for silence, and it's not locked. You press your fingers against it just once. It doesn't give, but you hear movement on the other side. You step back. You don't wait to see what or who was listening. Later, you tell Avis. She doesn't seem surprised. That door's older than the chapel, she says. Older than most of us. You ask why it hasn't been sealed. She smiles faintly. Because people still use it. You ask who. She just says, that's not my secret to give. The next evening, while the rest of the convent prays, you linger near the hallway above that passage, and you hear it. Quiet footsteps, not from the nun's side. Then a low voice. Male. Latin, but not scripture. A different cadence, a rhythm that sounds almost coaxing. Then silence. The next morning, Sister Agnes doesn't appear for breakfast. No one says anything. So now you're holding two secrets. One blooming like a pressed flower between you and Clarice. The other, darker, hidden, still forming behind that iron door. And still, the routines go on. The day begins with matins, ends with compline. The same chants, the same psalms. You recite them without hearing them now, your mouth moving while your mind drifts. You start to understand the allure of escape. Not running exactly, but slipping into another layer of existence, one just beneath the rules. That's what Clarice has become for you. A glimpse into that quieter world. The one where you're more than your obedience. You exchange notes in the margins of your assigned texts. Nothing obvious, just single words, a date, a question, a fragment from a hymn that's been bent into something else. You feel giddy, like a child hiding candy in her sleeves, but also guilty. And that's the part the church counts on. They've built a system where even tenderness is treason. And here's the question that plagues you as you lie awake one night, watching moonlight trickle through the dormitory slit windows. Is what you're doing really wrong? Or just forbidden? Because not once have you felt distant from God while thinking about Clarice. In fact, you feel closer, like you're protecting something sacred, something true. Scholars have chewed on this for decades. Were emotional bonds between nuns inherently sinful, or were they simply inconvenient to male authorities who needed to control women's bodies and loyalty? There are letters preserved from the 12th and 13th centuries between nuns that read like sonnets, full of aching devotion and physical yearning. Some argue they're spiritual, others say they're evidence of love stories erased from history. You think it's both. You think these women loved each other in the only ways they could, and sometimes, even beyond that. You've decided to write back again, but not with words. This time, you fold a scrap of fabric from your sleeve hem, lavender-stitched like the sprig she gave you, and leave it beneath the kneeler in the far chapel alcove, the one no one uses. You don't see her find it, but the next day, she looks at you during prayer just once, and it's enough. The kind of look that says, I saw. And for a moment, just a flicker, you feel free. You wake to screaming. Not the kind of scream that echoes from a nightmare or a stubbed toe in the dark. This is raw, primal, and utterly out of place in a space that prides itself on silence. You're already sitting upright before your brain has caught up, heart galloping as if the sound itself has teeth. The other sisters are stirring, confused, murmuring prayers or clutching their rosaries like weapons. Then you hear the footsteps, heavy, rushed. Someone shouting for the abbess. The screaming stops as suddenly as it began, leaving only ragged breath and frantic whispers. You lock eyes with Sister Avis across the room. Her face is unreadable, but her hand is already reaching for her cloak. No one tells you what happened at first. After the second bell rings, the abbess herself announces that morning prayer will be delayed, that something must be cleaned. The word she uses is cleansed, and it chills you more than the stone floor beneath your feet. By midday, the rumours are boiling. You find Sister Magdala alone in the kitchen, fingers still red from the cauldron, her mouth a tight line. "They found something," she says quietly without preamble. "A baby." The word drops like a stone. You're not sure you heard her right. A baby? She nods once sharply. A novice gave birth last night. In silence. She smothered it. Then, after a beat, and tried to hide it in the bread oven. You feel sick. The heat of the kitchen, the smell of rising dough suddenly unbearable. Magdala says nothing else, just turns back to her kneading like it's penance. But her hands shake. That evening the abbess calls a general assembly in the chapel. Everyone sits on the cold floor, arranged by rank, eyes lowered. Her voice is thin but sharp, like a cracked bell. She speaks of shame, of sin, of moral rot. There are forces, she says, that wish to undermine the sanctity of this holy place. She calls the incident an abomination, the word hanging in the incense-heavy air like smoke. The sister who committed the act is unnamed, but everyone knows who she means. Sister Adelina, the quiet girl from Normandy with a limp and a voice that cracked when she sang. She hadn't been seen since Compline. Some sisters cry, some pray. A few are frighteningly calm. Afterward you find Avis in the refectory, staring into a bowl of cold broth she's not eating. She had no choice, she says finally. No protection. No way to ask for help. She was terrified. You sit beside her, uncertain. Do you think it was a priest? Avis exhales slowly. If it was, we'll never hear his name. She'll carry all the weight. And that's how it works. The church writes its rules in stone, but buries the evidence in silence. If a nun is violated, she's often blamed. If she conceives, she's ruined. The men, transferred. Promoted. Restored to grace. There's even a Latin term for it. Lapsus. A fall. That's how they record it in the books when a nun is found to have sinned, as if her body tripped and just happened to land in disgrace. And here's the horrific historical fact. This wasn't rare. Throughout the Middle Ages, there are multiple recorded cases of nuns becoming pregnant, some by priests, some by visiting confessors, a few, tragically, even by their own family members before entering the convent. In many of these cases, the woman was punished, imprisoned, or in some instances executed. The men, if acknowledged at all, were gently reprimanded and reassigned. And yes, sometimes the infants were hidden. Behind altars, in cellars, in ovens. You don't eat that night. The next morning, the entire convent is forced to fast. The abbess calls it purification, but you know it's punishment, a kind of collective atonement, as if hunger can erase the knowledge that someone among you was so afraid, so isolated, that she had to give birth in secret and then smother the proof. Clarice finds you after none. Her face is pale, her eyes hollow. "She was in the dormitory last night," she whispers. "I heard her breathing change. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't." She trails off. You take her hand, just for a moment, just long enough to say, "You're not alone." That night the chapel is almost silent during Compline. Even the chanting is subdued, as if the building itself is holding its breath. You notice that two sisters are missing. Adelina, of course, and Sister Heloise, the one who always stood beside her. They were close, not whispered about close, but visibly attached, now both gone. You think about what Avis said, about the priest, about the door. Later, in the dormitory, someone begins to cry, just one soft sob, and then another. You don't look. You don't want to know whose grief is louder than their training. Here's the strange, forgotten fact for tonight. Some convents, especially the wealthier ones, had private birthing rooms. Not for the nuns, but for noblewomen from outside who wanted to give birth in sanctity. The irony. The pregnant nun was a scandal, but the paying noblewoman, holy, respected, wrapped in lavender sheets while midwives hummed Latin prayers. The same building, two different fates. The convent absorbs this scandal the way it always does, with silence. A few weeks from now, new novices will arrive and won't know anything ever happened. The name Adelina won't be spoken. Her bed will be restuffed with fresh straw. The blood-stained linen's already burned. Her fall reduced to a note in a dusty ledger, if that. But for now, you carry her in your thoughts. Not just her, but the baby too. Not because you knew them well, but because now that you know the truth, it doesn't unstick. It hangs in your lungs. It settles in the bones of this place like a second soul. And Clarice, she's not the same either. Her eyes don't linger as long. Her touch is gentler, almost hesitant, as if your connection might vanish too. You can feel her mourning something bigger than just a lost friend. She's mourning safety, the illusion of protection, the myth that obedience keeps you whole. You wonder if the abbess knows that grief can be contagious. You wonder if that's why she's watching everyone more closely now. Winter has thickened. The cold no longer arrives. It lives here now. It curls around the corners of your cell, creeps beneath your robe, numbs your fingers during scripture copying, and settles into your lungs when you breathe too deeply during prayer. The stone walls sweat with frost. The candles are shorter. The silence is louder. There's a weight to everything now. Like the convent has absorbed not just the cold, but the sorrow, the fear, and every secret that's been shoved beneath its stone skin. You try to keep your head down. After Adelina, the mood has shifted. The abbess walks faster, speaks sharper. Confession is no longer optional. Everyone is expected to participate twice a week, whether or not they feel the weight of sin. A few sisters have been reassigned. Clarice now copies psalms next to Sister Rebecca, the abbess's most watchful enforcer, while you've been moved to the infirmary. You have steady hands, they say. You'll do fine with poultices. That's how you meet Sister Wulfhilda. She's not a nun like the others. She's older, not in years, but in presence. The kind of woman who feels older than the convent itself. She wears her habit loose, has hair too short to be properly concealed under her veil, and keeps a carved wooden pendant on a string around her wrist. A fox, not a saint. She tends to the sick, the injured, and sometimes the punished. If someone collapses during prayer, she's there before the final syllable of the psalm. If a novice cuts her hand on parchment, Wulfhilda appears with thread, alcohol, and a muttered chant that you're almost sure isn't Latin. On your third day in the infirmary, you watch her grind dried yarrow into a fine powder. This helps with bleeding, she says, especially when it comes from a place no man will name. She says it without pause, without flinching. You glance at the herbs lining the shelves. Most are common: comfrey, sage, nettle. But others you don't recognise. Some are bound in red thread, marked with runes rather than labels. You see dried mandrake hanging upside down in a back corner, its roots twisted into something vaguely human. You're a healer, you ask. Wulfhilda grunts. I'm what they let me be, but I was trained by a wise woman before I ever put on this habit. Then with a smirk, the church prefers to call them witches. You don't ask if she still practices the old ways. The answer is already around you. Here's your quirky and unsettling historical fact. Before the witch-hunting frenzy really took off in the early modern period, many convents had sisters who served as unofficial herbalists. Some were trained midwives or learned apothecaries. Their knowledge of plants, cycles, and remedies passed down in whispers from mother to daughter, or in this case, from woman to woman in the cloister. They could ease childbirth, end unwanted pregnancies, or brew something that made the body forget its pain for a little while. The church tolerated them, even relied on them, until it didn't. Back in your workroom, you begin helping Wulfhilda measure tinctures, grind bark into dust, and apply salves to chapped skin. But more than that, you listen. Because Wulfhilda doesn't just speak in recipes, she tells stories. Of sisters who healed each other when the church looked the other way. Of prayers layered with older names. Brigid, Epona, Freya. Deities from before the cross took root in every town square. Not all gods demand silence, she tells you, while wrapping a sprained wrist. Some just want you to listen. You ask her cautiously if anyone else in the convent believes as she does. She doesn't answer at first, just ties the knot tighter. Then, we all believe what we need to survive. For some, that's Jesus. For others, it's memory. And for a few, it's the dirt beneath their feet and the smell of burning juniper. The next evening, you notice something strange. Sister Margareta, who'd been ill for weeks, suddenly stands during prayer without assistance. She looks stronger, eyes clearer. No one comments. But she pauses on the way out of chapel to press Wulfhilda's hand. Just once. A thank you, silent but understood. You realise that healing in this place happens beneath the rituals. The official herbs, the Latin chants, the holy water, all just a veneer. What really mends bodies and souls is the care passed hand to hand in rooms that the abbess rarely enters. You also realise how dangerous this is. If the church discovered Wulfhilda's methods, especially the herbs tucked in her private drawer, they'd accuse her of sorcery faster than they'd accuse a priest of anything. You begin helping in the garden too. Not the main one with the withered kale and medicinal rosemary, but the one behind the old laundry where no one goes except Wulfhilda and now you. Here, the herbs aren't labelled. You learn by smell and touch. Mugwort, skullcap, lady's mantle. You begin to memorise the feel of each plant between your fingers, the way their oils stain your nails. Clarice finds you there one afternoon. You didn't expect her, and for a moment neither of you says anything. Then she kneels beside you and begins pulling weeds like she's done it 100 times. "I thought I'd lost you," she says. "I've just been elsewhere," you say softly. "I know." You both work in silence, the tension between you softer now. Clarice brushes your shoulder. This time, you don't flinch. After that, she comes more often. You teach her the herbs you've learned. She shows you how to fold linen for wound dressings. One afternoon, she picks a sprig of rue and tucks it into your sleeve. "Protection," she says. Old wives' belief. And you understand. The secrets you're learning aren't just for healing. They're for survival, for rebellion, for remembering a kind of power the church would rather stay buried. Here's the scholarly debate you stumble into without warning. Was this kind of knowledge, female, herbal, intimate, an early form of resistance? Some historians argue that healing was a tool for reclaiming agency in a system built on obedience. Others say it was simply necessity, not ideology. But in your hands, the soft leaves of feverfew feel like both. A quiet defiance wrapped in green. You press your fingers to the soil, and for the first time in weeks, it feels warm beneath the frost. Not because winter is over, but because you found something alive under all this cold. And in the dark, secret garden behind the laundry house, you begin to believe that not every kind of faith starts at the altar. It happens during Vespers. You're kneeling on the chapel floor, head bowed like everyone else, but your eyes are half-lidded, fixed on the flickering candlelight, not the crucifix. The air smells of beeswax and old incense, and the rhythm of chanting has become something almost automatic. Your mouth forms Latin syllables like muscle memory while your mind floats elsewhere. And then, just as the choir reaches the Amen, a rustle, a shift. Someone moving when no one should be. You glance sideways, slow and subtle, and see Sister Avis slipping out the side door of the chapel. She's not supposed to leave during prayer. Neither are you. But something in the way she moves, quiet, sure, practiced, tells you she's done this before, that there's something worth seeing outside the rhythm of psalms. You wait until the final bell rings and the sisters begin to rise. Then you duck your head, slide along the edge of the pews and follow her. Outside, the wind slices sharp through your robe, but you ignore it. Avis moves fast, disappearing into the garden path beyond the old well. You catch up just as she's slipping behind the storage house near the outer wall, a place no novice has reason to go. Except now, apparently you do. You find her crouched low, opening a loose panel in the stone. Behind it, a tunnel, narrow, crumbling, lit by nothing but the fading daylight at your back. She doesn't look surprised to see you. "I figured you'd come," she says. You hesitate. "Where does it go?" "Not far," she answers, "but far enough." You duck inside. The tunnel smells of earth and old straw, and you have to hunch as you follow her through it. After a few dozen steps, you reach a low door. She knocks twice, then pushes it open. Inside is a small chamber, lit by a single oil lamp and warmed by a brazier. And there, sitting cross-legged on a blanket, robes pulled loosely around his shoulders, is a man. You freeze. He doesn't. He nods once, then looks back to Avis. This her? Avis shrugs. She's ready. You're not. Not really. But you step forward anyway. His name is Brother Aldrich, and he's not supposed to exist. Once a monk, he explains, handing you a steaming mug of something herbal. Now, neither here nor there. You sip the drink and realise it's mulled wine. Forbidden. Delicious. Warming. Why are you here? Because I left, he says simply. Because I couldn't live in a place where questioning is sin and obedience is holiness. He turns to Avis. Same for her. You glance at her, startled. You left? She smiles faintly. Once. I came back. Not for them, for the ones like you. The ones who still don't know there's another way. And here it is. The other way. A loose network of women, and a few men, who've found cracks in the wall, who sneak through tunnels, meet in hidden rooms, share food, ideas, books, sometimes more. They aren't formally organised. There's no grand rebellion, just small acts of refusal, passed quietly like seeds. Avis and Aldrich talk late into the night about texts you've never heard of, early Christian mystics, heretical writings, visions suppressed by Rome. They say Christ spoke in parables for a reason. They say not all saints were celibate. They say the church has never been afraid of sin. It's afraid of autonomy, and that's when the story of the nun who ran begins. Her name was Edgifu. It's whispered like legend in these secret corners. She was a sister at another convent, north, maybe in York, until she vanished. They say she escaped dressed as a monk. Some claim she was in love. Others say she had visions that no one believed. The church put out notices for her, branded her apostate, lost. But Avis says she isn't lost. I met her once, she says. She lives near the coast now, helps women who've been cast out, or who choose to walk away. You're stunned. She survived? She thrived. And here's the fringe historical gem for tonight. Nun runners weren't rare. There are actual recorded cases, some in church records, others in legal complaints, of women who left convents, disguised themselves, married, ran taverns, even joined pirate crews. One fled with a priest and opened a small school in secret. Some were caught and dragged back. Some were never found. One was excommunicated and canonized years apart. The line between heresy and sainthood? Paper thin, you spend the night in that hidden room, not sleeping, listening, learning, thinking. When you finally return to the convent just before matins, you slip through the panel behind the garden. No one sees you. Or maybe they do and choose not to care. That day you look at everything differently. The way the abbess preaches about obedience like it's oxygen. The way Sister Rebecca sharpens her gaze on the young novices like she's expecting betrayal. The way Clarice carries her small secrets so carefully, like they're fragile glass. You catch her in the hallway after supper. Tell her softly, "There's more outside the wall." She stares at you, and then, to your surprise, she nods. "I know," she says. You don't ask what she means. You're starting to understand that all of you, Clarice, Avis, even Sister Wolfhilda, are linked not by rules but by refusal. You're nuns, yes, but you're also something else. Women who've seen the edge of the page and chosen to keep reading. The abbess will never know what was whispered behind the wall tonight, and if she ever finds out, you'll know how to disappear. It's strange, how easily sin becomes currency. You start to notice it slowly, like mould creeping along the edge of a page. It begins in confession. Father Henry, seated in the claustrophobic wooden booth in the chapel's south transept, beckons each sister one by one. You kneel, you speak, you confess. That's how it's supposed to work. But over time you realise he doesn't listen like a priest. He listens like a collector, filing every word away, not for your redemption, but for his own quiet vault. You see it in how he lingers too long in the confessional with the younger sisters, how his voice softens when he addresses the noble-born ones, and how he eyes Sister Clarice after she leaves the booth, as if he knows something he shouldn't, something she never meant to give. You ask her, one evening in the garden, if everything's all right. She hesitates. He asked about you, she finally says. He wanted to know if we speak, if we're close. You stiffen. What did you say? I lied. The next day you're summoned to confession. No surprise. You kneel, heart thudding like a drum in your throat. The air smells of old incense and oiled wood. The grill between you and Father Henri seems too thin. You can hear his breath. You wonder if he can hear yours. "Daughter," he begins, "you've been quiet lately. Are you hiding anything?" You murmur the usual, impatience, wandering thoughts during prayer. Envy. There's a pause. Then, "And affection? Have you felt any inappropriate affection for your sisters?" You freeze. It's not subtle. Not even a little. "No," you say carefully. Silence. "Because it's important to be truthful," he says, voice lower now. "Some sins fester in darkness." You leave that booth with a chill that no woolen robe can fix. That night, you find Sister Avis in the scriptorium copying a hagiography with such precision it might as well be a spell. She doesn't look up when you sit beside her. "He's starting to probe," you say. She nods. "He always does when he's bored." And then she says something that sticks. The confessional is a stage. You just have to learn how to give a convincing performance. It dawns on you then. Some sisters treat confession like a game, not out of disrespect, but self-preservation. They craft sins that sound just guilty enough to satisfy the priest, but harmless enough to keep him from digging deeper. I was prideful. I envied Sister Joan's singing voice. I doubted during matins. These are safe sins, acceptable ones, the kinds that buy you privacy for another week. But slip even slightly, and your soul becomes leverage. Because that's what Father Henri does. He trades in guilt, he stores it like treasure, and sometimes, he uses it. You overhear him in the corridor one afternoon speaking with the abbess. His voice is quiet, but the word inappropriate cuts through like a dagger. You see Sister Edda walk past minutes later, pale, trembling. She's reassigned that evening, sent to the cellar to scrub floors and copy penitential psalms by candlelight. You never see her speak freely again. This is how power works here, and it's not just Father Henri. The abbess uses guilt like mortar. Sister Rebecca wields obedience like a sword. Even Sister Joan, privileged and poised, knows how to twist silence into advantage. One word from her, one tilt of the head, and another novice gets extra chores or loses her writing privileges for a week. You begin to understand that in this place piety is performative, confession is currency, and virtue is just a convenient disguise for control. Here's your unsettling historical fact of the day. Some medieval confessors were trained not just to absolve sin, but to extract it. They were given manuals, literal playbooks, that listed categories of sin and suggested how to question penitents about them. Ask if she has touched herself. Ask if she has lain beside another. Ask if her thoughts during prayer have wandered to the flesh. These weren't guesses. These were scripts, and women, especially nuns, were expected to answer, in detail. Sometimes the questioning itself was the sin. There's a scholar who argues that medieval confession booths functioned as the first psychological surveillance chambers, a place where women's thoughts, dreams, even their imagined desires could be weaponized against them. No action required. Just thinking the wrong thing could get you branded impure. You start keeping your real thoughts to yourself, not in your psalter, not in notes to Clarice. You bury them deep, where neither priest nor parchment can find them. Your sin, if it even is sin, belongs to you. One afternoon, you're stopped in the hallway by Father Henri. He smiles too gently. "Daughter," he says, "I sense restlessness in you. Perhaps we should schedule a private session." You smile back the way you've practiced. "Thank you, Father. I will reflect on my need for guidance." Then you walk away. And that night, you meet Clarice behind the old laundry house. She holds your hand in the dark and tells you about her dream, a dream where you both live by the sea, growing herbs and reading psalms without Latin or permission. No walls, no bells, just wind and salt and the sound of your own name spoken without fear. You believe in that dream now, not as fantasy, as a goal. But for now, you play the game. In your next confession, you say, "I coveted Sister Wolfhilda's apothecary skills. I felt pride when I remembered a psalm no one else could. I doubted the abbess's wisdom for a moment. The penance is light, the door opens, and you keep your real secrets folded like a letter behind your heart. You wake in the early hours to the sound of breathing, not the rhythmic rise and fall of sleep, but sharp, jagged gulps, like someone trying not to drown. You sit up in your straw-filled mattress and strain to see in the chapel's faint ambient glow, bleeding through the dormitory slit windows. The noise is coming from Sister Beatrix's cot. She's hunched forward, wrapped in her blanket, arms clenched tight around herself. You think she's crying? You don't ask. No one does. The next morning she's gone. At breakfast, the bowl meant for her sits untouched. Sister Rebecca says nothing. The abbess doesn't mention her absence during prayer. There's no explanation, no eulogy, not even a sideways glance. She's unpersoned, like she never existed. You ask Avis. She sighs and lowers her voice. She's having visions. You blink. Like dreams? No, the kind that happen when you're awake. You hear the words, but they don't register. Visions. In this place. Avis sees your confusion. Sometimes God speaks to women. Or something speaks. And when it happens in a convent, they have two choices. Declare you a mystic, or accuse you of being unwell. You ask the obvious. Which is she? Avis tilts her head. We don't know yet. You begin hearing whispers about Beatrix over the next few days. That she began speaking aloud during prayer. That she said she saw flames dancing on the altar but felt no heat. That she claimed the Virgin came to her in the garden, barefoot and smiling, with blood on her palms. She said she was chosen, one sister tells you behind the dormitory latrine. She said she could feel God's breath behind her eyelids. Clarice tells you something else. She laughed during Compline, not from joy, from terror. You finally learn she's being kept in the East Wing, in a solitary cell that used to hold broken tools and rotting manuscripts. Now it holds her. You beg Avis to take you there. She does, after dark. The door is wood, reinforced with iron bands. There's a small opening at eye level, just large enough to pass a spoon or peer inside. You kneel and look. Beatrix is sitting on the floor. She's filthy, shivering, humming to herself in a broken cadence. Her lips move silently. Her fingers twitch in a pattern, like counting or keeping rhythm with something you can't hear. She doesn't notice you watching. Or maybe she does, and just doesn't care. She hasn't eaten in 2 days, Avis says beside you. She claims food is earthly, that she's fasting to stay near the angels. She looks sick, or touched by the divine. It depends who's watching. And this is where things get complicated. Because medieval convents didn't always know what to do with women like Beatrix. Women who claim to see God, speak with saints, experience ecstasy during prayer. If the visions were poetic, church-friendly, and reinforced doctrine, you got declared a mystic, a living miracle, sometimes even a saint. But if your visions were messy, unpredictable, or spoke against authority, then you were mad, or worse, possessed. Beatrix's fate, as Avis explains, hangs in the balance of interpretation. She's said nothing blasphemous, yet. But if she does, if she contradicts scripture or questions authority, they'll call in an exorcist, they'll tie her down, they might even bleed her. And here's your historical twist of the night. Bleeding was a common medieval treatment for women believed to be possessed or mentally unwell. Leeching, cutting, purging. The idea was to release the bad humours. But in convents, sometimes it was more symbolic, a way of purifying a woman who'd strayed too far from silence. You begin visiting Beatrix in secret, slipping her crusts of bread, whispering psalms through the slit. One night she finally speaks back. They don't hear him, she says softly. But he's louder than the bells. You don't know if she means God or something else. Another night she asks, have you ever felt your bones hum when you're alone? You lie and say yes, just so she feels less alone. You ask Wulfhilda what she thinks. The old healer snorts. Visions? Most likely she's starving and sleep-deprived. She spends 12 hours in prayer and hasn't bled in months. That'll make a girl see saints. But what if she's telling the truth? Wulfhilda shrugs. The church doesn't care about truth, just about control. It's not that visions were unheard of. Women like Hildegard of Bingen, yes, that Hildegard, claimed divine revelations and were celebrated for it. But they had connections, male protectors, powerful patrons. Beatrix has none of that. She has you, Avis, maybe Clarice. But no one with a bishop's ear. You wonder what would happen if Beatrix did start speaking against the abbess. If she claimed her visions said the convent was corrupted, that the priest was tainted, that the Virgin herself weeps at the lies spoken in God's name. You don't wonder for long. because 3 nights later, you hear it. She screams during matins, loud, clear, words ringing through the cold stone chapel like thunder. She sits on the altar like a queen, but her heart is full of ash. He wears the stole of a priest but drinks poison with every breath. It's chaos. Sisters panic. The abbess turns purple. Father Henry bolts from his chair, robe flapping. Rebecca grabs you by the arm, yanking you back. Beatrix doesn't resist as they drag her away. She's smiling. That's the last time you see her. The next day, the abbess announces that Sister Beatrix has been sent to a nearby abbey for treatment. No one asks where. No one asks when she'll return. But Avis tells you later, they're bleeding her. Mark my words. And just like that, she's gone. Removed. Discredited. You can still hear her voice echoing in your head. Not the scream, but the quiet murmur. They don't hear him, but he's louder than the bells. You begin to understand that truth here isn't measured in clarity. It's measured in silence. You don't believe in miracles. Not in the clean, polished way they're carved into church walls. Not in the saints levitate and smile through pain kind of way. But a few weeks after Beatrix disappears, you witness something that makes you question whether faith is as tidy or as fake as you thought. It starts with Sister Agnes. She's one of the younger nuns, barely 18, all sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes. She's quiet, obedient, the kind that blends into pews and prayer lines, too soft-spoken to ever stir suspicion. That's probably why it happens to her. She's invisible. She's perfect, and perfect is fertile ground for drama. One morning during matins, Agnes collapses. Not just a faint. She drops like a felled tree, arms out, face pale as parchment, eyes rolled back. It happens mid-prayer, right between Dominus Vobiscum and Ecum Spiritu Tuo. Sisters rush to her side, the chapel shudders with confusion, and for once, even the abbess looks unprepared. Then Agnes opens her mouth and begins to sing. But it's not the hymn, it's not Latin. It's something else entirely. High, eerie, haunting, like Gregorian chant melted into birdsong and distant thunder. It doesn't sound human. It doesn't stop. Her body stays limp on the stone, arms outstretched like a crucifix, eyes wide but unseeing. The sound climbs, spirals, folds into itself like a cathedral collapsing in slow motion. It's awful. It's beautiful. When it finally stops, she breathes once, raggedly, and faints for real this time. They carry her out, and by dinner, everyone's talking. The official line is that she's been touched by grace. The abbess declares it publicly. A manifestation of divine ecstasy, she calls it, as if she's thrilled to have a spectacle to parade. You almost laugh. The woman who banished Beatrix for visions is now blessing Agnes for her outburst. She bled, Clarice whispers to you that night. Not from her hands, from her side. They said it was the stigmata. You can't help but roll your eyes. You believe that? Clarice shrugs. I don't know what I believe, but she looked different. And that's the thing. You see her the next day, sitting in the cloister garden, swaddled in extra shawls, and she does look different. Not holy, not radiant, but changed, hollowed out maybe, or stretched thin, like wax after a candle's been burned down to nothing. She doesn't speak to anyone. She doesn't return to her chores. She sits, she watches. Sometimes she murmurs to herself, too soft to catch. Once, you swear she stares at the statue of St. Barbara for nearly an hour without blinking. Now here's a historical gut punch for tonight. Medieval convents loved a bleeding saint. There are dozens of documented cases of nuns developing wounds that mimicked Christ's crucifixion. Bleeding palms, pierced sides, thorn-like markings on the forehead. Some of these cases were likely self-inflicted. Others, possibly psychosomatic. A few, still debated. But when it happened, the church noticed. Especially if it drew pilgrims, because that's the other side of these miracles. They brought attention and money. Within 3 days, word spreads beyond the convent. A merchant's wife shows up with her sick child, then a farmer whose crops failed. They all want to see the girl who sang with the angels. The abbess doesn't stop them. She tells them to wait in the chapel. She tells Sister Agnes to sit quietly near the altar for short intervals, dressed in white, veiled, glowing in the candlelight. They don't say it aloud, but everyone knows what's happening. The abbess has a relic now, a living one, and she's cashing in. "She's sick," Wulfhilda mutters as she packs a poultice. "Probably hallucinating. She needs sleep, not strangers kneeling at her feet." But no one listens to Wulfhilda. She's useful when you've got a boil or a twisted ankle, but no one wants her opinion on divine matters. She smells too much like mugwort to be holy. And Agnes? She doesn't fight it. She sits where they place her. She smiles when the abbess says smile. When asked to sing, she does, though the songs sound different now, more human, less miracle. The bleeding stops, but the pilgrims keep coming. You hear the money chests being opened more often. Coins clink in the hallway outside the abbess's quarters. Meanwhile, the rest of you get less bread. The entire convent begins to shift around Agnes. The chapel is cleaned more often. The sisters are reminded to keep their heads bowed. "We are being watched," the abbess says. "We are now the guardians of something sacred." Clarisse mutters, "More like the guardians of a gold mine." But there's something deeper, darker, twisting under the surface. You catch Sister Joan whispering to Rebecca near the candle rack. "She's faking it," Joan hisses. "She bit her hand till it bled. I saw the mark." "She's a liar," says another. "I heard her humming when she thought no one could hear." Not praying, humming. The same sisters who once wept at Agnes's feet now pass her with narrowed eyes. Agnes is no longer a miracle. She's a threat, because power shifts when one sister becomes larger than the rest. And the convent, like any holy machine, doesn't tolerate imbalance for long, and that's the twist in so many of these stories. Saints only stay saints as long as they're useful. There's one scholar, French probably, who argues that medieval holy women walked a knife's edge. Be too quiet, and you're forgotten. Be too loud, and you're heretical. Be just miraculous enough, and you're worshipped, for a time. One evening, Agnes is found on the chapel floor again. This time, not singing. This time, she's unconscious. The abbess says she fainted from devotion. Wulfhilda says her pulse was erratic, says she'd been dosed with valerian for days to keep her dowel. You believe Wulfhilda. After that, the pilgrims stop. The abbess says the miraculous season has passed. She stops asking Agnes to sit by the altar. Agnes goes back to copying psalms, slowly, as if she's learning her own hands again. No one speaks to her much. She's too holy, or too tainted, or too hard to look at. One night you find her alone in the refectory. You sit. She stares at her bowl, untouched. "I didn't lie," she says, almost to herself. You nod. "But I also didn't know what I saw, or why." You nod again. "I thought it was God, but maybe it was just me." She finally eats. You sit with her until the candle burns out, and in that flickering silence you think maybe miracles aren't about belief. Maybe they're about need, and right now, all anyone needs is to be heard. The bishop arrives unannounced. No letter, no warning bell, just a clatter of hooves in the cloister courtyard and a flash of red velvet trimming his robes as he dismounts with the flair of someone who expects people to kneel automatically. He's not young, but not ancient either. Somewhere in that comfortably middle age where authority and indulgence have already begun to curdle into a kind of smirking detachment. He has two attendants, both in darker robes, both watching everything as if this is a performance and they're here to decide who's out of tune. The abbess meets him with too much grace. Her voice is syrup, her bow a touch too low. She kisses his ring with theatrical solemnity, and he barely masks his pleasure. By nightfall, the convent is buzzing with tension. Floors scrubbed raw, altar cloths changed twice, psalters re-inked to hide smudges. Even the dried wax around the candelabras is scraped away. It's like preparing a stage, and you, along with every other sister, are now an actor in a very delicate play. He's here for an inspection, officially. A spiritual audit, they call it. A visit from the shepherd to ensure the flock is still safely fenced. Unofficially, he's here because of the singing. Because of the blood. Because someone whispered to someone in Rome that this convent might be sliding off the narrow path. And maybe, just maybe, because the church smells opportunity. Or scandal. Often both. You see him the next day during morning prayer. He sits in a special chair near the altar, flanked by his men, eyes moving slowly across the line of kneeling sisters. He doesn't look like a holy man. He looks like a merchant at market, inspecting fish for signs of rot. You wonder if he's ever prayed without an audience. Clarice squeezes your hand under the sleeve as you rise. Just once. Just enough. Later, you're summoned with 5 other novices to speak with him in the chapter house. You're to reflect on your spiritual formation, which is code for we want to hear if you've seen anything useful. The room smells of cedar and dust. He sits behind a desk too large for the space, his ringed fingers steepled like a parody of piety. "Do you feel loved by God?" he asks. You nod. "Are your sisters obedient?" You nod again. "Have you experienced any unusual disturbances in your sleep? Dreams, visions, temptations?" You hesitate. Only for a second, but he notices. His lips curl. "You may speak freely. Nothing leaves this room." Which is, of course, a lie. So you say what he wants to hear, that the convent is orderly, that the abbess is fair, that the recent rumours were exaggerated by pilgrims seeking spectacle, that Sister Agnes has returned to her duties with appropriate humility, that the singing was beautiful, but nothing more than fervent prayer. He nods as if you've passed a test. You leave the room sick with the weight of your own compliance. You find Abbess that evening in the garden. She's digging in the earth, her fingers caked with soil. "He's here to clean house," she says without looking up. "The church doesn't like messy miracles." You sit beside her and help pull weeds. "How long will he stay?" "Long enough to find something, or enough nothing, because that's what bishops do. They sniff for sin, and if they can't find it, they invent it. Here's your historical nugget for the night. Episcopal visitations, like this one, were a staple of medieval church governance. Bishops toured monasteries and convents, checking for doctrinal purity, moral integrity, and financial accountability. On paper, it was about protection. In practice, it was often about politics, power, diom, and punishment. A bad report could shutter a convent. A glowing one might lead to more funding, more status. It all depended on what the bishop saw, or thought he saw, or was paid to see. In the days that follow, he questions others. Clarice, Wulfhilda, even the abbess herself. The convent moves like a body holding its breath. Meals are quieter, songs shorter, prayers sharper, as though God is suddenly listening more closely. Then, on the 5th night, something strange happens. You wake in the middle of the night to muffled footsteps, not the shuffling of a sister going to the privy. Faster, purposeful. You sit up, listen. Doors creak open. A voice murmurs something in Latin, then a gasp. You slip out of bed and follow the noise barefoot through the cold halls. You find the source behind the scriptorium. The bishop standing far too close to Sister Joan, one hand on her shoulder, his face composed in mock concern. You don't hear everything, Marie, but you catch the tone, coaxing. You see the way his thumb strokes her arm. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't move. When he sees you, his face doesn't change. He just raises a finger to his lips. You return to your bed like a ghost and don't sleep at all. The next morning, Sister Joan is promoted. She's assigned to assist the abbess directly, a privilege, a reward, or hush money. You whisper what you saw to Abbess. She nods. He's not the first. He won't be the last. You wonder if anyone will say anything. You know they won't. Here's the fringe detail for this chapter. In a few rare cases, nuns did speak out. In 1326, in a French convent, several sisters wrote a collective letter accusing their visiting bishop of improper advances. They were silenced. Some were relocated. One vanished. The bishop was reassigned. Upward. The lesson? The church loves purity in theory, but power always wins the argument. By the end of his visit, the bishop announces that the convent is in good standing. He praises the discipline, commends the abbess, declares Sister Agnes a child of deep grace, but warns against sensationalism. He departs with 2 chests of coin, 3 bottles of Wulfhilda's medicine, and the names of 3 sisters he intends to recommend for further training. Joan is one of them. She won't return. As the hooves fade into the distance, the abbess exhales visibly. Back to order, she says, but you know better. Order never left. It just wears different robes. They say Sister Agnes is possessed. Of course they do. It was only a matter of time. Too much attention, too much grace, too much silence after the bishop left. And now, with no more pilgrims to impress and no miracles to polish, she's gone from holy to haunted, just like that. You hear the whispers first. She talks to shadows. She won't eat bread anymore. She's been seen standing in the snow barefoot, smiling. Sister Rebecca is the one who finally says the word aloud. Possessed. It's spoken in the chapter room like a diagnosis and a death sentence. She must be examined, Rebecca says, voice clipped and righteous. Her behaviour has turned erratic, blasphemous. She claims to see the Virgin in the rafters. The abbess purses her lips. We will investigate quietly, discreetly. We are not animals. But you can see it in her eyes. This is an opportunity. A possessed nun is a problem, but an exorcised one. That's a redemption story. They move her to a separate cell, not the East Wing this time, too close to where Beatrix once was. Instead, they place her in the old bell tower, empty now that the younger novices can't be trusted to climb the narrow stairs. It's dusty, cold, and full of spiders. Appropriate, you suppose, for a soul the abbess once cleansed. You visit her in secret. You don't tell Clarice. You don't even tell Avis. You go alone, after Compline. Slipping into the tower with a wrapped piece of bread and a flask of warm milk, Wulfhilda passed to you with a look that said, "Be careful," without saying anything at all. She's curled in the corner, still barefoot, still thin as a sigh. She doesn't speak at first, just watches the wall like it might start breathing. Then she says, "They want to burn it out of me." You sit beside her. What is it? She smiles without warmth. It's not a what, it's just noise, a buzzing. Sometimes it speaks. Sometimes it's just light. You ask if she thinks it's a demon. "I don't know what demons feel like," she says, "but this doesn't feel evil, it just feels loud." You stay with her for hours. She doesn't sleep, neither do you. The next morning you barely make it back to your cot before Lord's. The abbess begins preparations. An exorcist is summoned, a Franciscan from a nearby monastery. He arrives with a bag of salt, a jug of holy water, and the practiced weariness of a man who's done this before and knows the drill. Find the devil, drown him in scripture, collect your thanks, leave. He's called Brother Mathieu, short, grey-bearded, eyes like marbles, polished smooth by time. He doesn't smile, not once. The sisters whisper about him as he walks past. Some watch him with awe, others with fear. One novice says she saw him shake the devil out of a boy just by touching his forehead. You and Clarice sit together in the chapel as preparations are made. She leans close and murmurs, "They're going to break her." You don't respond. You don't need to. The next evening they hold the ritual in the scriptorium. They clear the desks, light candles, arrange prayer books in a semicircle. No novices are allowed to attend, but you find a way to see anyway, hiding behind a shelf, heart pounding. Agnes is brought in wearing white. Her wrists are bound with a soft cloth, more symbolic than restrictive, but cruel nonetheless. She doesn't resist. Her hair has come loose from her veil. She looks like a ghost of herself. Brother Mathieu begins. Latin, sharp and rhythmic, pours from his mouth like smoke from a chimney. He splashes her with holy water. She flinches. He presses across to her forehead. She blinks, slowly. He demands the demon name itself. Nothing. He repeats the demand. Still nothing. Then Agnes speaks. There is no demon. Only pain. The abbess stiffens. Only loneliness, Agnes says. Only silence, he demands again. I only screamed because no one would listen. The exorcism continues for an hour, then 2. At one point she begins laughing. Not madly, but softly, as if something struck her funny. She tells them the Virgin wears red in the winter, that Christ kissed her forehead in a dream and told her to sing, that the devil doesn't live in her body. He lives in their fear. After that, Brother Mathieu decides she's too far gone. She's sedated, moved again. This time to the cellar. Not the old storage rooms, but the space beneath the refectory. The deepest part of the convent, where the floors are always damp and the air smells of rot. You beg the abbess for mercy. She says, if she survives this, she will be pure. Avis finds you in the cloister the next day, holding your breath so you don't scream. She's not possessed, you say. She's broken. Avis's face is grim. The church doesn't know the difference. Here's your fringe fact. Medieval exorcisms were rarely successful in the way you think. Often the possessed died of exhaustion, injury, exposure, starvation. Or they were declared free of demons but permanently damaged, and yet the church insisted on the rituals, not to save souls but to control them. If a woman spoke too boldly, felt too deeply, or saw something inconvenient, possession was the easiest explanation, far more convenient than trauma, grief, or dissent. Clarice sneaks you a note 3 days later. She's not eating. You pass word to Wolfhilda. She sneaks in a tonic disguised as sacramental wine. It helps. A little. You manage to visit once more. Agnes is barely conscious. She whispers that she dreams of snow falling in the chapel, that the Virgin holds her hand at night, that she feels light pouring from cracks in the stone. You don't know if it's truth or delirium. You just sit beside her until the candle burns out. And you promise her, quietly, that you will not let her vanish, even if the church already has. The manuscript is found by accident. You're in the scriptorium, assigned the thrilling task of reorganizing the lower shelf of devotional commentaries, all heavy with dust and brittle parchment. Most of the volumes are standard fare: St. Jerome's Unending Thoughts, pages of red-lettered gilt, small marginalia doodles that are more curse than charm. But then you spot a leather-bound folio tucked sideways behind the others. No title, no mark on the spine, just thick hide stained at the corners with a leather tie holding it shut. You open it. At first glance, it looks like a psalter, but the script is different, looping, freer, almost playful. And then you realise these aren't psalms. Not really. They start like prayers but twist into something else. Verses describing hands and lips, knees bent not in prayer but longing. Flesh called holy not because it suffered, but because it felt. The images make it obvious, illuminations in the margins, curving vines that frame two women lying side by side, their hair interwoven like golden threads, faces turned toward each other, lips just touching. A saint, bare-chested, pierced not with arrows, but with kisses. The Virgin cradling a woman not like a child, but like a lover. Sensual, reverent, aching. You shut the book too quickly. Your hands are shaking. You look around. No one sees. You take it to Avis that night, heart racing as you untie the leather cord. She stares at it for a long moment, then exhales. I haven't seen this in years. You knew. I helped hide it. She flips through the pages carefully, fingers tracing the worn corners. It was written by a sister who lived here a generation ago. Sister Telesia. She was a poet, a scribe, maybe even a mystic, and she was in love. You run your fingers over a verse. Her body is a chapel, her breath a psalm, her mouth the doorway to revelation. It doesn't sound like sin. It sounds like worship. She wrote it in secret, Avis says. Some pages were copied from letters, others from memory, some from dreams. You ask what happened to her. Avis is quiet. One of the pages went missing. Someone found it. She was punished. She died 2 winters later from exposure. Officially pneumonia. But we know what really happened. She was left outside. She was made an example. You can't stop touching the page. It's soft with age, edges browned, but the ink still clings stubbornly to the fibres, as if it refuses to be forgotten. Here's your fringe historical find for the night. Erotic religious poetry existed, especially among women. There are surviving writings from medieval nuns that describe divine union in intensely physical terms. Some scholars argue that it was metaphor. Others suggest it was genuine sublimated desire, or even coded queer expression. The language of divine love and sensuality often blurred in convent settings, where desire had nowhere else to go. The most famous example is probably Hadewijk of Antwerp, a 13th century mystic whose visions read suspiciously like love letters to God, or someone who looked very much like him. But this manuscript? This isn't sublimated. This is direct. There's a poem that stops you cold. She kneels before me like a votive, and I, not Christ, not martyr, but woman, place my blessing where no priest may go. You close the book again, not because you're afraid, because you're overwhelmed. That night you lie in bed, not sleeping. You think of Clarice, of the way her eyes soften when she looks at you, of the nights you've sat in the dark, knees touching, breath close, silence thick with everything unspoken. You've never kissed. never even held hands for more than a second. But it's there. It's always been there. You ask her to walk with you the next evening. You take her to the old laundry garden. You hand her the manuscript. At first she just holds it. Then she opens to the illumination of the two women. She traces the image with her finger, then closes the book. And she kisses you. Not long, not heated, just certain. "I see you," she says. And for the first time in weeks, you feel like you're breathing your own air. The next day you give the manuscript to Wulfhilda. She has a space beneath the floorboards where she keeps things the church mustn't find. Herbs, tinctures, tokens. She adds this to the pile without question. "This is powerful," she says, "and dangerous." "I know," she smiles. "Good." You start seeing everything differently. The psalms, they're poetry now, not punishment. The ritual robes, costumes, the confessional, a place to perform, not to empty yourself. You watch the abbess pace during meals and realise she's afraid. Of what? You're not sure, but it's something. Maybe age, maybe change, maybe women who won't kneel just because the altar tells them to. Here's a scholarly argument for your collection. Some believe erotic psalms written by nuns were acts of spiritual resistance, a way to assert identity in a system built to erase it. Others argue they were private expressions, not political. But if you've ever lived inside the walls of a convent, you know better. Every choice here, every whisper, glance, breath, is political. You and Clarice don't talk about the kiss, not directly. But it echoes through everything now, in the way she brushes your hand when she passes your cot, in the way she stands a little closer than necessary during garden duty, in the way you no longer feel entirely alone when the bells toll. You start writing your own verses, nothing as bold as Talicia's, not yet, but the bones are there. She waits like dawn behind a veil, and when I turn, I see myself in her. You keep them folded in your psalter, tucked between Psalm 63 and 64. These psalms about thirsting for God. You don't think he minds the company. The church would call this scandal. You call it survival. It starts with a coin. Not a small one either. Not the kind passed discreetly to the confessor to shave off a few weeks of purgatory, or slipped into the chapel box with trembling hands and whispered prayers. This one is heavy, gold, stamped with a seal you don't recognise. A lion's head, maybe. Or a dragon, the face half worn from use. Sister Rebecca finds it in the infirmary, tucked beneath a basket of linens, and brings it to the abbess like a loyal hound carrying back a bone. "Who left it?" the abbess asks. Rebecca doesn't know, but that doesn't matter. The abbess turns the coin over slowly, eyes narrowing, mouth tight, like she's deciding whether to be offended or excited. By evening, 2 more coins appear, this time in the cloister garden, hidden in the roots of the old pear tree. By the end of the week, there's a purse, a leather pouch containing 7 gold pieces, no note, no explanation. And suddenly, the convent is changing again. You notice it first in the refectory, an extra portion of bread. Then in the dormitory, thicker blankets, fresh straw. Sister Wulfhilda receives new jars for her tinctures. The scriptorium gets a second inkwell. Even the chapel candles, once stubs barely taller than your thumb, are now tall and smooth, the wax melting in long, elegant drips. But no one talks about it. No one asks where the money's coming from, because they already know. Pilgrims have started returning. Not many, just a few, quiet ones. Some are sick, others simply desperate. They come not for prayer or relics, but for blessings. Specific ones. Fertility. Protection during childbirth. Safe passage for a voyage. Cures for afflictions that no physician will touch. And they ask, always, for one particular nun. Sister Wulfhilda. At first the abbess refuses. She's not a priest, she says. She cannot grant blessings. But the purse of coins speaks louder. And so, reluctantly, she allows it. Quietly, discreetly. A room is set aside in the eastern wing. Not the chapel, not the infirmary. A neutral space. Pilgrims are ushered in through the back gate. They kneel. Wulfhilda touches their foreheads, murmurs prayers that sound half Latin, half something older. Sometimes she places herbs on their tongues, sometimes she offers only silence, always. They leave lighter, and always they leave coins. The abbess calls it charity, grace, divine reward, but you and Avis know better. "She's selling blessings," Avis mutters one night as you pass the eastern wing. Selling her silence, her knowledge, her difference. You don't disagree, but you also don't blame Wulfhilda. Better her than a priest, Clarice says. At least she doesn't lie about what she's doing. And here's the historical twist of the evening. Medieval monasteries and convents often operated as semi-independent economies. They raised livestock, harvested herbs, brewed ale, copied books for noble patrons. Some even rented out parts of their land to tenant farmers. But the biggest source of soft income, spiritual favours. Pilgrims would pay for blessings, masses, even burial plots near holy relics. The church never called it commerce, but make no mistake it was, and now your convent is in the game. A week later, Wulfhilda's services expand. A noblewoman arrives, veiled and silent, and stays the night in the guest quarters. She's escorted to Wulfhilda's room at dawn and emerges just before Lord's. The abbess herself walks her to the gate. Rumours fly. She was barren, Sister Magdala whispers. She left with a pouch of rosemary and a smile. No, she was cursed, says another. She came to have the mark removed. You don't ask. But that night you find Wulfhilda sitting alone in the cloister watching the stars. Is this what you wanted, you ask. She laughs once. Wanted? No, but it was always going to happen. You're helping them. I'm tolerated, she says, as long as the coins keep coming. You sit beside her. The air smells of sage and cold stone. She reaches into her robe and pulls out something wrapped in cloth. I found this in the purse, she says. Not a coin. You unwrap it carefully. It's a pendant. Small, bronze. A figure, vaguely female, arms outstretched, face worn smooth with time. Not a saint, not a cross. Older. Do you know her? Wulfhilda asks. You shake your head. She's older than Christ. They used to leave her at doorways for protection, or bury her in gardens to keep the soil fertile. She puts it back in her robe. Someone knows who I really am. You ask if she's afraid. No, she says, but I'm being watched. Because that's the other change. The abbess watches Wulfhilda now like a hawk circling a fox. She smiles at her in public, defends her to the bishop's letters, but she doesn't trust her. No one trusts power they can't understand. One night you hear Wulfhilda's door open after curfew. You follow. A young woman stands in the hallway shaking. Her robe is wet with blood. She says nothing, just hands Wulfhilda a small bundle. Wulfhilda opens it, eyes sharp. You don't see everything, but you catch the shape. A tiny body. Still. Silent. A miscarriage. Wulfhilda nods once. I'll handle it. She sends you back to bed. In the morning, the convent is silent. Nothing is said. No one is missing. The floors are swept. The altar is polished. But you notice Wulfhilda's eyes. Red-rimmed. Heavy. Clarice finds you in the scriptorium. She touches your wrist. You saw something. You nod. We all do, she says. Eventually. And that's the thing no one says aloud. This place survives not on purity, but on discretion. The abbess preaches order. The priest sells forgiveness. But it's women like Wulfhilda who keep the blood off the floor and the secrets under the stone. She's the real power here now. Not because she rules, but because she knows how to bend the rules without breaking them. And the abbess, she's not angry. She's taking notes. The revolt doesn't begin with a shout. It begins with a missing spoon. No one knows who took it, or even if it was really stolen. It could have been lost in the laundry, buried in the garden, dropped in the fire pit. But when Sister Theodota, the youngest of the novices, barely 15, all elbows and anxiety, gets struck across the knuckles with the abbess's switch for carelessness, something shifts. Not in the air, not yet, but in the eyes of the other girls. They don't weep or gasp or clutch their rosaries, they watch, closely, silently. And when Theodota's hands begin to swell, blue and raw from the strike, they pass her boiled comfrey behind the abbess's back. They braid her hair while she sleeps. They start to whisper differently. The spoon is never mentioned again. But from that moment on, the younger sisters begin to organise themselves. It's small at first. Someone forgets to bring fresh candles to the abbess's chambers. A page from the Psalter is copied upside down. The altar cloth is ironed with a pleat where no pleat should be, and when Sister Rebecca barks orders, they reply with a chorus of "Yes, sister," that all sounds perfectly obedient until you hear the tone. Sweet, blank, mocking. Avis notices first. She pulls you aside during garden duty and murmurs, "They're waking up." You watch them, 6 or 7 in particular. The girls who share a common look, tired of fear, curious about power. You remember what it felt like, not so long ago, to learn that holiness and silence weren't the same thing. You see it happening now, like a chain reaction, soft and inevitable. Clarice calls it the quiet fuse. Here's a piece of historical dirt they don't put in the hymnals. Nun uprisings happened, real ones. There are records from 14th century France of entire groups of nuns refusing to obey abbesses they accused of corruption. Some demanded better food. Some refused to attend services. One group barricaded themselves in their dormitory and wouldn't come out until the bishop promised to replace their priest. These weren't just outbursts. These were deliberate, organised, risky. And they were almost always erased, quickly, cleanly, and with just enough punishment to remind everyone who was in charge. In your convent, the younger sisters aren't writing manifestos. They're watching, listening, passing notes, taking cues from each other and from you. You've become a kind of accidental symbol. The one who walks beside Clarice a little too closely. The one who speaks softly to Wulfhilda. The one who gets sent to scrub the apothecary, but never returns smelling of soap. They're paying attention. So is the abbess. She starts cracking down. More chores, less free time. Mandatory silence after none. Scripture drills until midnight. Clarice is reassigned to the front gate. Far from the scriptorium, far from you. Sister Theodota is sent to clean chamber pots alone, but the girls don't break. One night you find a line of poetry carved into the underside of your cot. Obedience is a veil. I can see through it. No name, no signature. But the script looks familiar, neat, young, brave. You copy it into the margin of your psalter. You begin to notice their strength isn't in noise, it's in echo. One girl cuts her veil slightly shorter. 2 days later, 5 more follow. One walks slightly slower past the abbess, head held just a bit higher. The rest start doing it too. A beat of hesitation before bowing, an extra second of eye contact before stepping aside. Not defiance, not exactly, but not submission either. And here's where it gets real. One of the younger novices, Sister Benedetta, is accused of stealing honey from the abbess's private stores. You don't know if she did. You don't care. The abbess demands a confession. Benedetta refuses. The entire novice dormitory refuses to sleep. They stay awake all night, sitting upright in their beds, silent, eyes open. The dorm mother begs them to lie down. They don't. In the morning, the abbess finds them still sitting. Not rebellious, just waiting. Benedetta isn't punished. But the abbess does something worse. She makes an example of Avis. At evening prayer, the abbess stands at the front of the chapel and announces that Sister Avis has been found keeping inappropriate books. She says that such materials endanger the spiritual health of the entire convent. That disobedience must be uprooted before it spreads. Avis is removed from her post and reassigned to the laundry. She's not allowed to speak. She's forbidden from copying texts. Her books are burned in the refectory fireplace. You watch the flames, helpless. As ink bubbles and parchment curls. You try to speak to her. She won't meet your eyes. She's doing it to scare them, Clarice says, to break the chain. But the chain doesn't break. That night, a bowl of warm water appears at Avis's door, then a fresh robe, then bread. No one says who left them, but she knows. And the next morning she's back in the cloister garden tending herbs. Forbidden? Yes. Stopped? No. Because control, the abbess is learning, only works when people believe in it. And belief is fading fast. Here's your quirky but powerful fact. There are records of nuns using coded embroidery to protest oppression. Marginalised sisters would weave secret messages into hems, cuffs and altar cloths, symbols of resistance, initials, even entire poems. The church called it decorative. The sisters called it truth. One evening, as you pull on your robe for Compline, you notice a pattern stitched into the cuff. 3 small crosses, one upside down. The mark of a sister who's not afraid to say the rules are broken. You don't know who did it, but you pull the thread tighter and walk into prayer, unbowed. They call it a trial, but it's more of a spectacle. No jury, no defence. Just one shivering sister, a burning brazier, and a room full of eyes pretending this is justice. Sister Hildegard is the one they've chosen, though you suspect chosen is the wrong word. She's the kind of nun no one notices until she trips over her own thoughts. Quiet. Awkward. Once she misquoted the Magnificat and someone laughed. She hasn't spoken much since, which of course makes her a perfect scapegoat. When a small reliquary goes missing, a cheap one, nothing more than a wood carving of St. Apollonia's tooth, if it ever really held anything at all, she's accused of theft or desecration, depending on which sister you ask. But the abbess doesn't call it theft. She calls it a spiritual breach, the punishment, ordeal. Your stomach drops when you hear the word. It's an old practice, supposedly banned, but not technically outlawed by the bishop's last letter, just discouraged. And when has the abbess ever cared about discouragement? You hear about it from Avis first. They're going to test her, she says, grim. The iron. You know what that means. Everyone does. Here's the historical nightmare for the night. Trial by ordeal was a medieval legal practice used to determine guilt when there was no evidence. The most famous, the ordeal of hot iron. The accused would carry a heated piece of metal a certain distance, usually 3 paces. Then their wounds would be bound for 3 days. If they healed cleanly, they were innocent. If not, guilty. God, they believed, would protect the blameless. God rarely did. Clarice is furious. It's barbaric. It's theatre, says Wulfhilda, who's been asked to prepare the ointment for afterward. Are you going to help, you ask? Wulfhilda doesn't answer. Just begins mixing honey with sage and comfrey in a ceramic bowl. The ordeal is set for Sunday, just after Lord's. No one speaks at breakfast. No one eats much. Even the abbess looks paler than usual. You're assigned to clean the brazier. You try to refuse. You're told it's a privilege. The iron rod is already laid out. A flat, narrow bar about the length of your arm. You try not to look at it directly. Its surface is pitted, blackened. Used before, it smells like ash and memory. When the sisters gather, they do so in silence. No hymns, no processions, just a grim semicircle around the courtyard where the brazier glows like a second sun. Sister Hildegard stands barefoot on the stone. Her hands are bound in front of her, wrists trembling, but she doesn't cry. She just stares ahead, like she's already left her body behind. Father Henri is there too, of course. He mutters a blessing over the iron, which seems offensive somehow, as if God would sanctify this. The abbess reads a psalm. The Lord is my refuge. You wonder if she even hears herself. Then the iron is lifted from the coals. Red hot. Sister Hildegard doesn't scream. She walks 3 steps, slow and mechanical, the iron burning her palms. By the second step, the skin begins to smoke. By the third, the stench is unbearable. She drops the bar, falls to her knees. Wulfhilda rushes forward with the salve, ignoring the abbess's scowl, wraps the hands gently, muttering, not Latin, something else. Then Hildegard is carried away, and the courtyard is dismissed, just like that. You vomit in the corner behind the dormitory. Later that day, the abbess proclaims that Sister Hildegard's wounds will be examined in 3 days. God will show us the truth, she says. No one applauds. 3 days pass. You try to visit Hildegard, but you're turned away. She is being watched, they tell you, for spiritual guidance. You slip in anyway. She's lying on a cot in the east wing, hands bandaged, lips cracked. Her eyes don't focus. She murmurs something you can't quite catch. You sit beside her, and then you hear it. She took it, Hildegard whispers. Sister Joan, I saw her. You freeze. The reliquary. She knew. She saw it. She was innocent. Of course she was. You find Avis. We have to tell someone. Who? The abbess? She knows. Because this isn't about finding the truth. This is about control, about fear, about reminding everyone what happens when you stand out. When you speak out. At the examination, Hildegard's wounds are unwrapped. They're red, infected, angry. The verdict, guilty. She is demoted, forbidden from taking communion for 6 months, assigned to the latrines. You're told not to speak to her again, but you do, every day. Here's your scholarly debate for the evening. Some argue that ordeal was never really about divine justice, that it functioned as social coercion. The community expected a result. And if the accused walked away burned, they got their scapegoat, their closure, their illusion of order. The rest, collateral damage. Afterward, things are quiet. Too quiet. The younger sisters stop carving messages, stop lingering. Avis returns to the scriptorium but doesn't speak. Even Clarice pulls away, afraid. But you? You sit beside Hildegard each night. You read her psalms, the gentle ones, the ones with water and wings and mercy. And sometimes she smiles. Just barely. A letter arrives from Rome. It's thick, sealed with wax the colour of dried blood, and carried by a courier in dust-covered robes who won't meet anyone's eyes. He delivers it directly to the abbess, bows once, then vanishes through the gate without waiting for food or sleep. That alone is strange. Couriers usually rest at least a day, eating their fill and exaggerating stories for an eager audience. This one seemed eager to escape. The abbess reads the letter alone in her chamber. The sisters know this because they see the candlelight flickering under her door long past matins, long past midnight. When she emerges the next morning, her face is drawn tight, her mouth a straight line, eyes raw from little sleep or too much reading. She says nothing about it, but something has changed. And then the whispering starts. It begins with Wulfhilda, who's always had a sixth sense for secrets. It's not just any letter, she tells you, her hands wrist-deep in yarrow. It's from the Holy Office, the inquisitorial branch. She doesn't look up. Not a blessing, not a commendation, a warning. A warning for what? She doesn't answer, just presses a scrap of cloth into your hand. Watch, and keep quiet. Later that evening you catch Sister Rebecca slipping into the abbess's chamber. Unusual, she rarely enters without being summoned. Stranger still, she carries a bundle wrapped in linen. You think it's laundry until the edge flutters open as she moves. Parchments. Old, worn, stained with the distinctive thumbprints of time. Documents. After Compline, the abbess begins a spiritual review of the convent's internal texts. Anything not approved by Rome is to be surrendered immediately. No questions, no exceptions. She makes the announcement with her hands clasped neatly at her waist, but the tension in her shoulders betrays her. She's afraid, but not of the sisters. Of something else. Someone else. You find Avis in the scriptorium hurriedly sorting through a bundle of codices. What's happening? There's something in the archives, she whispers. Something the church doesn't want to exist anymore. You blink. A book? Worse. A letter. Signed by a former pope, one who visited this convent decades ago. Why? Avis doesn't answer for a long time. Then, he didn't come for prayer. You don't press. She's shaking. You've never seen her afraid like this. She hands you a bundle, pages stitched together crudely, too new to be scripture, too old to be anything written by the current sisters. I don't have time to explain. Hide this. You tuck it under your robe and flee. You hide it in the garden, in the hollow of the pear tree wrapped in oilskin and prayer. Later you read it. It's not just a letter, it's a confession. From a nun named Alodia, who lived 2 generations ago. In it, she writes of a visitation by the Holy Father. A visit that was meant to be brief and symbolic, but became something else entirely. He stayed for a week, spoke only to a handful of sisters. One became pregnant. The letter doesn't say who, only that the abbess at the time silenced it, covered it, baptized the child in secret, and claimed it had died during childbirth. But Alodia writes otherwise. She says the child lived. She says it was taken. She says the bloodline continued. And here's the historical jaw drop. While the church officially declared Pope celibate and above reproach, history tells a messier story. Pope Alexander VI, yes, the infamous Borgia, had multiple children, openly acknowledged. Others kept their secret. One pope during the 13th century was suspected of fathering a child with a nun from a French convent. The accusation was buried. The convent was dissolved. No one knows what happened to the child. Elodia's letter is dated just after that. You show it to Clarice. Her hands tremble as she reads it. So, the Pope came here? You nod. And the abbess knows? She is the line, you say. Clarice stares at you. She's a descendant. It's possible. Clarice laughs. Then what is she guarding? This place or herself? It reframes everything. The abbess's fear, her tightening control, the sudden silence around certain names. Even the strange way she once lingered over Sister Joan, protecting her until she became inconvenient. Maybe Joan knew. Maybe she was too close to finding out. You ask Wulfhilda what she thinks. She exhales slowly. If that child survived, and the line continued, she says, it would mean that someone in this convent has papers